prepared to let diplomacy play out for a little bit here to see if there's a possible negotiated outcome. Time will tell. I think watch and see how Iran responds to the olive branch that President Trump has offered. In the past, they haven't seized the opportunity to pursue peace. They've doubled down on their demands and on regime preservation. So we'll give diplomacy a chance, it seems, but I'm not that optimistic that Iran is actually going to play ball here.
Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison and other leaders from that state are expected to testify today before the Senate on alleged fraud. And prosecutors in Illinois announcing new charges against several foreign nationals for a $1 billion health care scheme. Fox News legal consultant Jonathan Turley on what we can expect today.
Well, this is going to be a very important hearing because Minnesota comes out of these reports by the Oversight Committee looking particularly bad. You know, fraud is like water. It finds its way in. And Minnesota appears to be that weakest spot. And fraudsters are rational actors. And you had people like Governor Walz, who's also going to testify, saying publicly how easy it is to create daycares and get grants and money in Minnesota. But it was like an infomercial for fraud.
Two landmark trials underway this week against social media giants are shining a spotlight on the potential dangers of minors' digital lives. In New Mexico, Meta faces allegations of failing to protect children from exploitation. Meanwhile, a high-profile bellwether trial in Los Angeles seeks to determine if platforms like Instagram and YouTube are designed to get children addicted to their content. In the New Mexico case, a former Meta employee spoke out about his own daughter's experience with a practice known as sexploitation. Florida Congresswoman Laurel Lee.
Well, this is the reality of where predators are going to target our children today. So it's called sextortion, and what they will do is solicit young people to send photos of themselves and then use that to exploit them and try to induce them into more and more harmful behavior. The rise in this conduct is staggering.
And finally, a Democrat member of the House openly mocked a witness for his Christian faith.
The left seems to think it has the moral high ground when it comes to immigration, to the point that they apparently fear neither man nor God. New Jersey Congresswoman Monica McIver was grilling ICE Acting Director Todd Lyons about his role in enforcing the country's immigration laws.
Mr. Lyons, do you consider yourself a religious man?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yes. Okay, well, how do you think Judgment Day will work for you with so much blood on your hands?
I'm not going to entertain that question.
Oh, okay, of course not.
She also asked Lyons if he thought he was going to hell. When admonished by the chairman of the committee, she feigned ignorance.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just asking a question. You guys are always talking about religion here in the Bible. I mean, it's okay for me to ask a question, right?
Dr. Alex McFarland of Exploring the Word on AFR says the exchange said more about Representative McIver than it did about Acting Director Lyons.
She's a fool. She's a fool. And I use that in the most careful theological sense. According to Proverbs, it says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God.
He says McIver is in no position to moralize about anything.
I should hardly think we would look for soteriological truth from a member of the party committed to the murdering of babies.
But he says as long as she's asking things,
she needs to ask Jesus Christ to come into her life and be her Savior.
I'm Steve Jordahl.
There's more online at afn.net and download the AFN mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Every day, AFA offers biblical insight on issues that others aren't willing to touch in the hopes that you'll become a world changer. That's why we're offering an in-depth worldview training course called Activate. 13 different professors teaching 18 sessions, all available online, including a printed workbook to help you apply what you've learned and 1-year access to AFA streaming content to give you even more resources. Find out more about Activate and sign up today at activate.afa.net.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Thursday, February 12th, and there has been yet another school shooter, this time in Canada, who has been identified as transgender. So someone who was born male but identifies now as female and apparently started identifying that way as young as 12 years old. This is just an incredibly sad story. So this coming from the New York Post, transgender Canadian school shooter who slaughtered 8, including mom and stepbrother, seen holding rifle in eerie photo. So this person was only 18 years old and was an ex-student who went on the rampage at a secondary school. And then in the press conference after this shooting, the police were wanting to respect the gender preferences of the shooter, because apparently still in 2026, this is something that is a thing where instead of looking at the facts, facing the facts, and questioning, maybe some of these hormone-inducing drugs and some of these other things that we've been experimenting with medically are resulting in a really alarmingly high instance of some of this, what has been termed trans violence. And the statistics are getting more and more severe. And this just really begs the question, where do we go from here when you have a leftist ideology that refuses reality? And it's not just the harm of taking away opportunities and championships and so forth from women's sports, but it's now resulting in a very high incidence of actual violence and harm against others. And yet we don't see that there may be some causation here, and that these drugs and this type of ideology is incredibly damaging. So let's welcome in Father Frank Pavone. He's founder of Priests for Life and one of the foremost advocates for life and reality and the truth. And so, Frank, I read some of these headlines and then I see how law enforcement and, government and the so-called quote unquote experts, the powers that be, react to this. And it's really, I think, irresponsible at this point. It was irresponsible from the beginning, but especially at this point with now all of these instances to continue to deny reality and to be trying to, quote unquote, trans children as young as 12 in this case, but in other cases, as young as toddlers.
Yes, exactly. This is an example of how ideology blinds us. Radical ideology of transgender, political ideology. In other words, the difference between having a strong conviction versus ideology is that with the latter, you lose common sense and you lose the ability to analyze situations objectively, go where the evidence leads, pay attention to patterns. I share your sentiment. I'm sick and tired now of hearing about, here's another act of violence and, oh, by the way, the shooter was transgender. Enough already. When are we going to connect these dots? And the dots are being connected for us. And so to fail to ask the question of, okay, what is this connection? We have to look at the causality here, and then we've got to double down on our policies of getting rid of this mutilation of children, both for their own good, which of course is a theme we've been hitting on for a long time, but now obviously for the common good, for the safety of our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet it's the left that refuses to look at reality and to say, okay, maybe this was a bad idea, to accept responsibility and course correct. There are so many different apt phrases and other paradigms and all of this that say, if you are the longer you stay on the wrong track, the further it takes to come back home. The longer that you go down a bad road, then the more time it takes to come back to where you got off to begin with. And our society is experiencing that. But yet even Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, I mean, this was just insane that during an appearance on The View this week, so, perfect forum for this kind of nonsense, he explained how allegedly his Christian faith informs his leadership, including opposition to legislation restricting treatments or protections for trans youth. I mean, and I know that you heard this clip, but he said, for me, it's my faith. Most of the decisions I make are based on the golden rule that says we love our neighbors, we love ourselves. And the parable of the Good Samaritan says that everyone is our neighbor. And so my faith teaches me that all children are the children of God, and I don't want people picking on those kids. I mean, utterly.
This reminds me of. Yeah, it's ridiculous. It reminds me of Paul's words to Timothy. Those who hold to the form of religion but deny its power. This is the superficial use of religion, the abuse of religion. I mean, the devil himself quotes scripture, as we know, and this is, we see the same thing in the abortion battle. Abortionists that we can point to who say, I do abortions not despite my faith, but because of it. And there's entire organizations like the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, So this is just another variation on the same theme, and these are people who think that religion just means God is patting us on the back. Ultimately, we can do whatever in the world we want, and believe whatever in the world we want. And religion is just, the window dressing that's going to give us God's pat on the back for us following our own way. But the power of religion is that inner transformation where we no longer follow our own way, we follow Christ. And that means we take off the old man, like Paul says, reject that life of sin and self-centeredness and arrogance and all the vices that he lists and put on the new man made in the image of Christ. This is the power of religion. And these people, and I will go so far as to say, the Democrat Party now as a whole in its modern day form is guilty of this.
Yeah, so well said. And it is absolutely true that people use and twist and contort scripture for their own purposes. And instead of conforming their lives to the truth and the power of Christ, they use it for their own evil purposes. And these are the people that will, at the end during the judgment, when they will say, but Lord, I called upon your name, and he'll say, depart from me, I never knew you. I mean, these are people that this is what it means to take the Lord's name in vain.
Exactly. Yeah, that's precisely right. Yeah, and it's like, it doesn't matter that he taught in our streets or that we ate with him. What he's asking is, did you obey me?
Absolutely. And, another individual that we talked about yesterday who is also denying the power and in taking the Lord's name in vain was Carrie Prejean Boller, who now has been, she has basically been denounced by a Catholic organization, the Catholic League, who said, and I think that they're right on this, that for her to say without qualification that Catholics do not embrace Zionism is presumptuous and arrogant. Her audacity is stunning. And they say, they basically denounce her without using the word, that she was being anti-Semitic, but clearly she was. And this is another person who is now the update on this, by the way, for the audience who's listening who hasn't heard this, she has now been relieved of her commission status, her position on the Religious Freedom Board by the chair, who's the current Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. She's now saying, you don't have the authority to kick me off the board. And she's saying, imagine kicking me off. Where is religious freedom just for my Catholic faith? Well, that's a shield. She's being kicked off because she hijacked a hearing. And she used it for her own political purposes, but now she's claiming religious liberty, which is such a stupid shield. But the point, Father Frank Pavone, is that she's using this label of her Christian faith and suggesting that somehow her Christian faith requires her to hate Zionism, which ultimately means hating Jewish people.
Well, I was at that hearing, Jenna. I've been going to the hearings of the Religious Liberty Commission at the invitation of the administration since the beginning. The president founded this last May, and I have never in any of these hearings seen a display like Carrie put on the other day. Never has Chairman Patrick had to do what he did during that hearing. At a certain point, he had to take his gavel and hit it repeatedly, and never have I seen the audience roll their eyes and scratch their heads the way that they did every time she spoke the other day in this hearing. And never have I heard people of the audience shouting out, as some of them felt compelled to do. And one of them, in fact, was so rambunctious that the chairman had to ask him to leave the room, even though he was basically taking the position we take. I mean, the emotions ran so high because not only was she being, first of all, inaccurate in her portrayal of the Catholic position on this, but Jenna, she was being childish. She was being immature. She was trying to turn this hearing into an interrogation where she was saying, "I want a yes or no answer. Are all Catholics anti-Semitic because we're faithful to our teachings?" And she was just being ridiculous. Look, let me clarify for the audience where the Catholic Church stands on this. Catholic teaching does not reject Zionism if what you mean by Zionism is that the people of Israel have the right to their own state, and that we have that it is incumbent on us to be in solidarity with them. Now, this distinction came up in the hearing and by the way, this back and forth, this hearing lasted for the course of about 6 hours. And periodically through that time, this little back and forth reasserted itself, and various members of the commission clarified Catholic teaching, but also some of the Jewish scholars that were there testifying said, "Look, let's make a distinction here. If you don't believe that biblical prophecy points to the modern state of Israel as its fulfillment, that's a theological difference, and we can respect theological differences. And in fact, Catholic teaching doesn't require a connection between biblical prophecy and the modern-day state of Israel. But what was also said accurately was, this gives nobody the right to say that Israel doesn't have a right to its own country." I mean, and one of the rabbis was saying, are we going to be the only people that are denied the right to have our own country? And then, of course, even making the theological nuance, the point was made that sometimes a theological position, which can be valid to hold in and of itself, is used as a mask for anti-Semitism. And I think that was the big warning that should be taken to heart. Catholics believe that the promises of God to Israel continue. Though, yes, Jesus Christ is the fulfillment, obviously, of the law and the prophets. He's the fulfillment. But that doesn't mean that God has abandoned the covenant with Israel. As a matter of fact, in our Catholic prayers, for example, on Good Friday, there's a special set of prayers, and one of them is for the Jewish people. And the prayer that I have right here says, for the Jewish people, that God may grant them to advance in love of his name and in faithfulness to his covenant. So if we're, as Christians, even if we're saying, if the emphasis is, hey, wait a minute, the new Israel is the church, we are the fulfillment. Yeah, we're the fulfillment. But if we are, how in the world can we look down on what we're the fulfillment of? I mean, how could we separate ourselves from that? How could we not, embrace with love and the greatest loyalty our Jewish brothers and sisters who happen to have a state of their own that we defend? I mean, Jenna, the whole thing is I was scratching my head and I said, this whole argument is ridiculous. Why? How is it that every Christian doesn't just see so clearly, including every Catholic, that we cannot be who we are unless our Jewish brothers and sisters are honored, celebrated, protected, and affirmed in who they are.
Yeah, so well said, and I love the point that you made, Frank Pavone, that the theological disagreements of ultimately prophecy and fulfillment, and the New Testament with the Old Testament. There are some even Protestant evangelical Christians that are for replacement theology or covenant theology. They believe that the church replaced Israel, and that is an in-house debate. I've even had friends of mine who believe in that view on the program. We've discussed it, but we're still friends, and it doesn't devolve into anti-Semitism, which was the purpose of that hearing. And so there's a distinction between saying, okay, how do we properly read Scripture, and we can and should discuss that. That's one question. But even if you are someone, and I'm a dispensationalist, everyone knows that who listens to this program. I'm an evangelical Christian. I believe that God's covenant is enduring. There is a lot of church history and also theology and Scripture that backs that up, including Romans 9 and 11. But even if you are a believer in covenant theology, that doesn't then give you license or justify anti-Semitism in the way that it has been presented on the New Right, and especially how it was in this hearing. And the problem especially was that this was a hearing on anti-Semitism, and then it became basically one of the board members trying to justify anti-Semitism and now being removed. I mean, that to me, Frank Pavone, is absolutely using the Lord's name in vain.
Well, and Jenna, I was sitting there, and frankly, I was embarrassed as a Catholic to hear what this woman was saying. And I'll put the blame also somewhere else. I think the reason that a Catholic like Carrie can feel so confident in speaking for all Catholics, as she was erroneously doing, is that some Catholic leaders, I got to lay this at the feet of some Catholic bishops and even some statements of Pope Leo, that despite what I just explained is the official Catholic teaching, nevertheless, some of their posts on social media and some of their statements have condemned actions of Israel and not condemned actions of Hamas. How is that even possible to a thinking human being, or much less a religious leader, that you're going to convey, without saying it explicitly, but conveying by the absence of what you say or by the imbalance in what you say, conveying this idea that, hey, we got to be careful of this, Zionism, and let's not be so pro-Israel that we, miss their responsibility. And I'm looking at this and saying, you guys ought to be, it's just the opposite. If you're going to err on the side of faithfulness to to our best ally over there in that part of the world, and the people of God Himself. So I put the blame partially on the shoulders of some of these Catholic bishops who have just issued these comments that sound more like they're coming from the Democrat Party than from a Christian leader.
Yeah, so well said. And we've got to take a break here, but this is a great example of why the separate jurisdictions of the church and the state for Christians, when we are part of the church, first and foremost, this grants us freedom to not have to be concerned about the political implications of truth. I mean, I'm out every day on social media saying things that are truthful that may not be popular, but they are the truth. And first and foremost, my obligation is to be an advocate and an ambassador for Christ. And if that's not favored by either the Democrat Party or the Republican Party, well, too bad. And this is where even Christian politicians should have the courage to say truth first. But when we're not even in a political office and you don't have to make that calculation, nobody in the church should be putting politics over truth. So we'll be right back with more.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you're just not happy with what you've got, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and it's proven for more than 30 years. It is proven, And we know this from member surveys. People love it, which is why it's grown to hundreds of thousands of members across the country. One big factor, besides the peace of mind that comes from being a Medi-Share member, the savings is tremendous. It is not atypical for a family of 4 switching to Medi-Share to save more than $8,000 a year. It is a difference maker. And you can get 24/7 telehealth. You get access to more than 1 million providers and hospitals. There are flexible options, too, for your budget. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You could join Medi-Share anytime. So call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. Here's the number. 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
The following is a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
I had a lot of credit card debt, and it stressed me out. But what I thought was a solution turned out to be a problem. I kept hearing ads about debt settlement that seemed too good to be true. And actually, it was. When I called, they told me to stop paying my bills. That didn't sound right to me at all, so I hung up. Later, I found out that debt settlement is bad, real bad. Then I learned that there is a right way to pay off your credit cards. It's called a debt management program from the great team at Trinity. Trinity had a plan. In the end, I paid off my bills, I saved thousands, and I even improved my credit score.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
My name is Heather. Please forget debt settlement and remember Trinity Debt Management.
1-800-788-1813.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. A gender bender in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Governor Maura Healey appointing a man pretending to be a woman to a commission on the status of women. The commission assigned to focus on improving opportunities for the gals. Gazelle Bird is a man who dresses like a woman. He also thinks America's a racist nation. Mr. Bird posting a note saying he was honored to be the first transgender woman of color on the commission. In Massachusetts, men apparently make the best women. Dr. Carol Swain is a leading conservative thinker, said liberal women have allowed men to erase their biological identity and reverse their historic gains. The Massachusetts Family Institute said Mr. Bird's appointment is the logical conclusion of feminism in society. And if it goes unchecked, well, the future achievements of females will be relegated to obscurity. So you better man up, ladies. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, this issue with the Religious Liberty Commission and the White House is going even more viral than it was yesterday. And now there are some who are claiming that this fired Commissioner Carrie Prejean Boller now may have a viable religious discrimination claim against the government for being removed from the panel. But this is what the chair, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick of Texas, actually posted on his social media, declaring that she's no longer part of the commission. Boller has been removed from President Trump's Religious Liberty Commission. No member of the commission has the right to hijack a hearing for their own personal and political agenda on any issue. This is clearly, without question, what happened Monday in our hearing on anti-Semitism in America. This was my decision. The commission has done outstanding work through 5 hearings. 2 more are scheduled. The testimony has been both illuminating and heartbreaking. Under the Biden administration, Americans of all faiths have had their religious liberty not only stolen from them, but were often punished for standing up for their faith in education, the military, the private sector, and even the ministry. This spring, the commission will deliver one of the most important reports in American history directly to the president. The president respects all faiths. He believes that all Americans have a right to receive the great inheritance given to them by our founding fathers in the First Amendment. I'm grateful to President Trump for having the vision and boldness to create this commission. Fighting for the word of God and religious freedom is what this nation was founded upon. Leading this fight will be one of his greatest legacies. Signed, Dan Patrick, chair of President Trump's Religious Liberty Commission. So let's welcome in Gerard Filitti, who is senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. And Gerard, so, this woman is not going quietly, and I think it's just so clear that she's trying to just use this for political gain because, nobody knew who she was 5 minutes ago, and now, this is a big story on the right just because she was, this rude and inappropriate. But to the legal question, does she have a religious discrimination case?
Very simple answer, no, she does not. This is something she was removed from the panel for her conduct. She was removed from the panel, and that's clearly stated by Lieutenant Governor Patrick, that this was because she hijacked the hearing for her own personal and political agenda, not because of her religious views, not because of the performance of her religion. She was fired because she was inappropriate. And for that, you do not get to sue and recover your job on religious freedom grounds.
Yeah, and this makes sense, of course, because then literally anyone who claims any faith whatsoever could claim discrimination as a cover for any other conduct. I mean, if you, for example, steal from your workplace or you're embezzling and you get fired, over that conduct, and you claim, well, wait, I'm a Christian, so you can't fire me. Well, no, because that's not the actual basis of the removal. And so that just naturally makes sense. But here she's also claiming that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, the chair of this commission, doesn't have authority to remove commissioners because she was appointed by the president to that board.
Well, that's a question that goes to the mechanism of how this board works, how the Religious Liberty Commission works. Generally speaking, it's understood that the chair or the highest authority within a commission does have the ability to remove members for cause. That's something that she may very well dispute. And because this is a new organization, this commission was created by executive order by President Trump last year. This may be something that will need to be addressed. It would be beneficial if perhaps President Trump himself declares that her presence is not wanted on a commission and supports Lieutenant Governor Patrick. But at the end of the day, that's more of a minor technical issue than what she's claiming to be religious freedom.
Right. And that totally makes sense. And, even scrolling through some of her responses on social media, people that she has, reposted, like, for example, this very, kind of woke right lawyer, unfortunately, that is kind of going off on a lot of very what I would deem anti-Semitic commentary, suggesting and saying, and this is what he posted, that she reposted, opposing a DNA-based supremacy claim to the Holy Land is based on a 200-year-old doctrine of dispensationalism, and that's not anti-Semitic. Dispensationalism is heresy. And he goes into, all of this nonsense about how, this kind of false history about the view of dispensationalism. But to suggest somehow that this is conduct that is appropriate or becoming of a commissioner that is on, this high level of a commission that's designated by the White House is just really incredibly inappropriate. And so, what are the potential alternatives now for the White House in terms of the PR? Because, noticeably, the president and even also the press secretary has been silent on this.
Well, I think that is an issue that we're seeing. This is not a single issue about Carrie Prejean Boller. We see this with Candace Owens. We see this with Tucker Carlson. We see a deliberate framing that is far more troubling. It's an effort to repackage classic anti-Semitic tropes in theological language to make them sound principled rather than hateful. And this is what we saw at this hearing. This is what we're seeing from some on the right who are abusing their views on religion to propagate Jew hatred. So this is something that is uncomfortable for the White House right now because a lot of these people are very key Trump supporters. But at the end of the day, I think that President Trump will do the right thing. He will not let the Republican Party destroy itself by abusing views on religion in order to discriminate and target against fellow Americans.
Yeah, and this is becoming a more and more fracturing issue on the right, unfortunately. But it's really odd to me, especially in the context, Gerard, of how the outrage cycle worked last Friday, when the left immediately capitalized on, this video that was kind of the Pride Lands and showed Trump as king of the jungle and the lion, and then kind of played into that classic that racist trope that showed Obama and Michelle Obama as apes, and clearly the White House, whoever the staffer was that posted on Trump's Truth Social, that wasn't the main video that they were intending to post. But nevertheless, the Democrats jumped on this kind of this racist narrative and the outrage cycle, and yet they've been surprisingly quiet about the actual problem that is on the right, which is, in my view, it's not racism, it's anti-Semitism. And somehow Democrats aren't really challenging this, and I kind of wonder why not.
Well, the Democratic Party has increasingly lost its touch and become the party of anti-Semitism. And they're watching the Republican Party start to turn the same way with glee. You're not going to hear Democrats who are critical of efforts to combat anti-Semitism, which President Trump has done commendably since his first day in office. You're not going to see them attacking anti-Semitism because they really don't care, to be honest. They're looking at this as a way that the Republican Party will follow in the steps of the Democratic Party and exclude Jews. So this is something that, for them, is a win. It's a win because they can focus on cultural issues that they believe are strong to them, on these left-wing extremist causes, on having transgender in politics and sports and everything. That's more focus for them than having the ability to fight anti-Semitism. So you see silence in the Democratic Party because this is something that they're happy with. They like what Boller said. They like that approach. You didn't see criticism of her coming from Democrats. You're actually seeing some Democrats embracing her religion in order to justify their hatred of Jews.
And this is where, the woke right is going further and further away from the standard of conserving truth. And this is why, Gerard, for a long time, I've always described the political spectrum as not linear, but actually a bell curve. And if you have the middle isn't being moderate, the middle is actually conserving truth, and you can fall away from that further and further away to the left or to the right. And we're seeing that the further and further you get away from genuinely conserving the truth, whether it's on the left or the right side, it ultimately ends in some of the same conclusions, which is not moral legitimacy, not legitimacy in civil government, but actually some of the same problems, including anti-Semitism. And you wrote a great piece in jns.org, and the title is Anti-Semitism is Not Catholic, Why the Church Cannot Platform Candace Owens, granting legitimacy to rhetoric that conflicts with sacred teachings, risks confusing the faithful and undermining moral authority. And I agree with that, especially on the civil government context. And when we're talking about all this, not even just in the context of theology and what the Bible teaches and prophecy and some of those things, we're actually then correlating this with political strategy and foreign policy and all of this. It really undermines the moral authority and legitimacy of the civil government as well.
It does, and that's the problem here. When you're using religion and misusing, really, that's the better way to put it, when you're misusing religion as a sword against a minority group or against American values, against classical religious values in the context of government, then you are really perverting not just the separation of church and state, but you are co-opting religion, you are co-opting worship, you are co-opting people who believe, faithful people, into a political ideology that you're using religion to justify. So that's really dangerous because people are more apt to believe when they already have that faith. You're looking at the faithful and you're framing political issues in religious terms, but using religion in a way it was never intended to be used in order to justify the most outrageous political ideology. So that's really where the danger is.
Yeah, and that's what I was describing in the last segment with Father Frank Pavone as using the Lord's name in vain. I mean, using religion as a justification to advance a political ideology that is totally contrary with Scripture, and that's using the Lord's name in vain for Christians or for people like Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, who are claiming that somehow the Bible justifies this transmutilation of children. I mean, utterly ridiculous nonsense. But the left also does this in terms of their worldview and their ideology, which is a religion. If we define religion as a worldview that is a way of attempting to place moral authority as the underpinning of the legal justification. And they do this with cultural Marxism. I mean, when they are using Marxism as a justification to suggest that, all white people are the oppressors and to basically be terribly racist in that sense and suggest that there has been, the systematic oppression of all these minorities, they're actually using a religion or a worldview to justify immorality as well.
In their worldview, the role of God is replaced by the role of the state, but it's no different than religious ideology. They're in the same beliefs in a worldview and how things should work. They're justifying in terms that in our context would be seen as religious. In theirs, they see it as statist, but it's really the same thing. It's the same fervent belief system that replaces God with the state. So it really is a religion of communism, a religion of Marxism that we're seeing.
Yeah, well, we got to take a break here. Gerard Filitti, I really appreciate your time on this. And, it's good to know that a lot of this is just empty rhetoric and that Carrie Prejean Boller doesn't have, any sort of leg to stand on in terms of, looking at the board and any sort of religious discrimination claim. I mean, this is just something that hopefully maybe this instance will cause the right and those like President Trump, who really hasn't said anything, but has largely stood very passionately with Israel and understands all of the political implications, to actually come out and affirm what the position of the right always has been and should be, that, of course we support the nation of Israel and of course we respect the Jewish people. So I really appreciate it, Gerard Filitti. We'll be right back with more.
Fostering and adoption is not a Band-Aid for infertility. It is a calling, and God can change the desire of your heart and make that so rewarding. It's the most beautiful, selfless thing. It's pure religion, but it's not a fix to I desire biological child. God has to deal with that in your heart separately.
Hannah's Heart, encouraging couples through infertility and miscarriage. Saturdays, 4 a.m. Central on AFR or on the AFR app.
If you have a good reputation, the day of your death is better than the day of your birth. What Solomon is saying is this: looking back at a life well lived is better than looking forward to a life unlived.
Join Dr. David Jeremiah for his message, When Bad is Better, on the next Turning Point Weekend Edition.
Listen to Turning Point, Sunday mornings at 7 o'clock Central on American Family Radio.
You will know them by their fruits. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. The state of Massachusetts is on track to set mileage limits for drivers. The bill is SB 2246. It directs the state to set targets for reducing total vehicle miles traveled statewide, targets that will be incorporated into transportation planning, infrastructure investment, and long-term emissions policy, all in line with climate alarmism, of course. This comes from the same playbook as 15-minute cities, limiting human mobility, and efforts to control the whole of human life by central planners. For our own good, of course. There are evil people and seducers, waxing worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. The Massachusetts legislation is further evidence of that fact.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
Without even seeing them show up, I could feel
like the darkness.
Jamie Sanchez is another Christian business proprietor who has been targeted for his faith. His Drip Cafe was opened to serve and help the homeless of downtown Denver.
We believe sex outside of marriage and homosexuality is a sin in God's eyes. And the enemy and his minions decided to use that as a platform.
Jesus told us persecution would come.
I would see them, just the rage and the hate. I pictured them doing that at the foot of the cross to Jesus. And I just remembered what he said, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." And so I had to position my heart that way.
The Jamie Sanchez story is one of the videos of the Impact series at stream.afa.net.
It's been a crazy, crazy ride.
See Jamie's story and much more at stream.afa.net.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, a few other headlines that you need to know about. The government is approaching yet another partial shutdown. So this coming from time as Congress edges closer to Friday's funding deadline that could shutter the Department of Homeland Security. Lawmakers in both parties are warning that the consequences may be most acutely felt by those traveling, like we experienced back in November when, of course, with the Thanksgiving holiday that was approaching and a lot of the air traffic controllers were put on leave and all of this. So, didn't we learn our lesson here? I mean, this is just so ridiculous. But at a House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing on Wednesday, the acting head of the Transportation Security Administration offered a blunt reminder of what a protracted DHS shutdown would mean for air travel. Most TSA officers would remain on the job unpaid, protecting the more than 430 commercial airports nationwide. But many, are still concerned about this. And so Senator Markwayne Mullin, who's a Republican from Oklahoma, said the end game here is very hard to predict when you're dealing with Chuck Schumer. Fair point. I think what's likely to happen is that we do a continuing resolution once again for a few weeks. That will probably be sometime tomorrow, meaning today. So the reason why is because you have 30 Democrats leaving tomorrow to go to Munich. The Munich Security Conference is February 13 through 15, so really they need to get all of this done today. Meanwhile, the Judiciary Committee holds their first hearing on the Sharia-Free America. So Congressman Chip Roy and Representative Keith Self were the catalysts for the Sharia-Free America caucus, but I also had Congressman Brandon Gill from the state of Texas on earlier in the week. If you missed that interview, you should really listen to it. He made some excellent observations about how Islam is infiltrating America, why this is so important. And for this caucus, they were joined early in the month by Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville and other leaders. And on Tuesday, they held a hearing that included testimony that Rep. Roy asked one of the authors who gave testimony, Robert Spencer. He's the author of Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam. If it was safe to say that the goal of the Islamic movement is to make the United States Muslim, Spencer responded, that's very clear from the explanatory memorandum of the Muslim Brotherhood, saying that the goal is that Allah's religion is victorious over other religions, and they're working toward eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within. And all the non-Muslim apologists for Sharia that we see are indications of how successful that hearing has been. So you can watch that entire hearing on YouTube, and it's really concerning. I'm really grateful to the Republicans who are bringing attention to this issue, but even more importantly, as Congressman Gill said on the program earlier this week, not only do we need federal legislation on this to just ensure it's basically a redundancy protection for what the U.S. Constitution already requires, which is that we have a supreme law of the land. We don't have parallel legal systems, nor a religious legal system. So that we need that kind of redundancy protection on the federal level, but we also need legislation throughout the states to ensure that there are no state parallel courts that would undermine the United States, would undermine our system of government, and really be, kind of this catalyst to usher in Islam into America. So really important here. And I would encourage you, if you want to support this caucus, call these members, call your state legislators as well, tell them about what Christians believe on this issue, and especially for the members of Congress. Sometimes we see all of these headlines, but they don't necessarily directly hear from us. The encouragement, sometimes we tend to only call when we're complaining about something, so it's a really good thing when they do things that we appreciate, to give them a call as well and say thank you for standing firm. So I've passed along specifically, my thanks to these members as well. But the House has also passed the Save America Act, and so now all attention is turning to the Senate, and this coming from the Wall Street Journal in a 218 to 213 vote, almost entirely along party lines. Isn't that ridiculous? The House approved the measure known as the Save America Act, a measure that would require a documentary proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote in federal elections, and would establish a nationwide voter identification requirement for casting ballots. This just seems, completely obvious that this is something that would be good for America, because we have to use ID for so many other things. And if we don't have to use ID for elections, what is that allowing? Well, people who shouldn't be voting in elections. And if there is disenfranchisement of people who shouldn't be voting in elections anyway, that's not actually disenfranchisement, that's election security. And so even former President Barack Obama, of all people, goes on X and talks about how the SAVE Act is going to make it, a disaster for America. And he says Republicans are still trying to pass the SAVE Act, a bill that would make it harder to vote and disenfranchise millions of Americans. And then he's like, tell your member of Congress to vote no. And I responded to this and said, if you are able to vote legally, showing identification won't disenfranchise you. If you aren't able to vote legally, not showing identification will disenfranchise everyone else. And this is so obvious, and yet Democrats are just openly suggesting that, first, they suggested that this was racist, and somehow, minorities were so confused and, and incompetent that they couldn't go and get voter IDs. And of course, members of those minority groups were very vocal, saying, yeah, we can, and we're fine, and we actually agree with this. Now the attention has been turned to women, and you have so many members, even Jamie Raskin, and then they've enlisted a lot of, or several of the Democrat women members of Congress to go out and make these videos on social media talking about how, it's just going to disenfranchise, so many millions of women who, if they get married and they change their name legally, that, that's not going to allow them to vote, which is utter nonsense. That is not at all what this legislation is saying. And that has been debunked through the legislation itself. But, we know that. And yet they're trying to advance kind of this fear that somehow it will disenfranchise women. And I love some of the comments to this where people are saying, you really think that women aren't competent to go through the process of a name change and then show that have an ID and then be able to, prove who they are. I mean, under no other circumstances, whether it's, flying, whether it's anything else, obtaining a passport, any of these things, a name change on any basis, but especially for marriage. But, you can change your name legally anytime you want to. But for the name changes, that's never been an issue with anything else. And the Democrat Party has never thought that it's been an issue with anything else. But suddenly, when it comes to securing elections, now this becomes, hugely problematic. So it's just a ridiculous way of suggesting that we shouldn't have voter ID, but don't get caught up in the lies, because, the Democrats are not pointing out anything that is a legitimate concern. They just want ultimately their preferred outcome, which is that they don't want voter ID. And we have to always ask the question, well, why wouldn't you want our elections more safe and secure? Because if it's easier to vote, harder to cheat is, kind of what the right has been using as their slogan for this. Why wouldn't you want that? And of course, they can't answer that honestly. So this other headline, though, that you really need to hear is that the UK Supreme Court has now said that oat milk cannot be referred to as milk, apparently because somehow someone somewhere was thinking that oat milk was actually a derivative from a cow or a goat somewhere. And I just had to laugh at this. And I was talking to my producer, Luke, as we were, going through some headlines yesterday. And we were just laughing at this because of all of, the utter absurdities to suggest that anyone in any country, I mean, maybe the people in the UK just, they're a little bit more confused than here in America. But nobody has ever been confused that oat milk or even almond milk is a derivative of an animal byproduct. I mean, this is why, these are alternatives when you're lactose intolerant, for example. And so somehow now, though, if you go over to the UK, I don't know what they're going to replace it with. If it's now going to be like, oat, like cream or does that, because cream actually suggests, a lactose derivative. So, I mean, what are they going to call it? Like oat water, but it's not actually water either, but it's so ridiculous. And it reminded me of the Smart Water lawsuit where a guy actually claimed that it was false advertising because Smart Water didn't make him smarter. And I'm thinking, well, you definitely need something besides Smart Water if that's what you think, and you're drinking Smart Water because you actually think that the implication of the title smart is that it increases your intellectual capacity rather than just this is a good decision and it's health, it's for your health. But people are just so ridiculous. And this is why if you ever look at a container, like, take the plastic off of the pizza before you microwave it, and some of these things that are just so plainly obvious, chances are there was somebody somewhere that was stupid that initiated a lawsuit that then required, as part of the either the settlement or the court judgment, to actually have to go and correct this because we don't want somebody else to be stupid down the line and end up ingesting plastic because they forgot to take the cover off of their microwave pizza. I mean, these are things that we study in law school that you just gotta laugh because people are just utterly ridiculous on some of these things. And and this is also why tort reform is kind of a big deal. But in response to the Smart Water lawsuit, there was a great response that was kind of through a lot of these social media headlines that someone said, well, I'm going to sue Girl Scout cookies over Thin Mints because the cookies didn't make me thin. I laughed at that one too because, obviously that's not what they're suggesting. But if you are like Amelia Bedelia, did you guys ever read those books as a kid? Those are some of my favorites where, she was the housekeeper that took everything literally, like I'm going to hit the road. So she literally took out a stick and started like smacking the road with a stick. This is what these types of lawsuits are based upon, is that you don't have an actual intellectual understanding. You're just taking everything so literally that you are making a lawsuit out of it. So this was just so funny. But apparently in the UK, now oat milk is not a thing. The poor little oats are going to have to be labeled something else. So in just the last couple of minutes we have here, one other thing that you need to be paying attention to is the Blockbuster job reports. So much better, obviously, than oat non-milk, but it surpasses expectations. Over 170,000 private sector jobs. So with Treasury Secretary Bessent emphasizing the re-privatization of the American economy. The Financial Times says the U.S. economy blew past Wall Street's expectations for for the added 130,000 jobs in January, signaling that the labor market is healthier than economists had feared following a recent number of gloomy reports. So this could be a good upswing in terms of the impact for the midterms, because everyone is focused on affordability, the economy, and some of these things that will shape voters' opinions come November. So this is good news for the Trump White House. Hopefully, the free coffee that you get in the lobby is not made with oat milk. It'll just have to be, oat derivative or something. Or maybe here now in the U.S., we can still call it oat milk because we know what we're doing. All right. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. As always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna, at afr.net.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast